I want to take just a minute to show you a cool trick and a useful tool that you can do with CSS, and that is to create gradients as part of a background of a page, or the background of a div, or the background of just about any container that you can use in CSS. You can also apply a gradient to a button to create some pretty cool effects. So you can create gradients by hand, but there's a great tool out there that's called CSS Gradient Generator. It's at cssgradient.io. And if you go to the website, you can see here it comes up with a nice tool that's fairly user-friendly to create a gradient. And it will do a live demo of the gradient you're working on right up here on the page. So you can see that if I select this one over here and I start to do things like change the color, I can change the opacity of the color, I can change the saturation and the darkness. You can do a lot of things there that are really cool. And you can also change the direction of the gradient. So if I want it to go from left to right or right to left and so on, all of those are things you can do. This also allows you to create multiple colored gradients. You can see it's got an example of that here. I can pull that color right off. And if I want to, I can add additional colors. They default to whatever that color was in the gradient, but then I can start playing around with those and do some pretty cool stuff, honestly. You can create all kinds of really pretty gradients. And then when you're ready to put those into your web page, you can just take the code from right here. And this code has 2 lines of CSS. What you'll maybe be able to figure out by looking at them is this one defines just a solid background color for the gradient. And the bottom one actually defines the gradient itself. And the reason there's 2 is that some browsers, some older browsers, don't support this. So it applies the background color of the solid color, which is supported by nearly every web browser. And then it layers this one on top of it with the idea that if it doesn't support it, it'll at least have a background color that's part of the gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and copy both of those. And I'm going to take them over to PHP Storm so I can show you how those work. Now I've got a very basic web page here with a body and a div. Here the div is set to fill up the whole screen. That's what these margins are set to, and the height and width, because I want to be able to demonstrate a few things to you. Right now, without anything applied to it, it looks like this, really basic. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to apply the gradient to the body tag, and there it is, just copied and pasted. And you can see it's got all the colors in here that show up, and this is the color that it will default to if I have a browser that doesn't support the gradient tag. So I'm going to do that, save it, and then I'm going to upload that. And you can see the horizontal one works beautifully to fill up the whole window in the body tag. But if I, for example, instead of having a 90-degree gradient, have it at 0 degrees, or let's just say 180 degrees, I get a slightly different result. And I get a different result if I remove the styling of the div so that that page is not so tall. It's going to repeat like this. And the reason that it repeats like this is because the content of the page is only that tall. You can see that it will repeat based on the height of that content. So if I put a line break in here and another word, and I refresh that page, now the gradient itself changes because it's the height of the page that's controlling that. So that's the reason that I had all of this div styling here, because forcing that to a height of 1000 pixels forces that gradient to stretch out. And so I can change the gradient there to the width of that page. I can also, instead of applying the gradient to the body, I can take that and I can put that gradient in the width. And the way that works is, right now, it's going to look very similar. But if I change the size of that to, let's say, 500 by 500 pixels, now that div is actually a different color or different size than the whole page. That gradient still fills up the entire width. Okay, so you can control that as well. And then I could style this div as independently of the whole page. So a few different ways you can apply gradients. I can apply that gradient to a button if I want to. So there's a lot of different things you can do with gradients. And this tool, the CSS gradient generator at cssgradient.io, is a nice user-friendly sort of visual way to create gradients. You can, of course, use the code just like this. But it's so much easier to use a tool like this, at least until you get familiar with what you're doing.